This is a new episode of the Roscoe's Wetsuit podcast. I'm your host, Toby Passman. For the first intro segment, it is the real quote of the day. This is coming from one of my favorite artists, Childish Gambino, off of his 2014 mixtape, Kauai, and specifically the song Late Night in Kauai featuring Jaden Smith, along with a guy he just calls Fam, who I believe is a friend of his. Um, so the quote is, "It's all about packaging, right? Real shit, though. Good and bad is all relative, man. It really is. A lot of people are sheep. We don't even know what we like anymore. We just know what the most hype is. Shit, do you really like that shit you like? Or do you like the way they gave it to you? You know what I'm saying? Pepsi, Coca-Cola, same thing. David Chappelle said that the one that tastes the best was the one that was paying him the most at the time." So we'll get into that lyric in a minute, but well, actually, I'll speak a little bit on it. Just my first impressions, what I got, right off the bat, as far as it's about packaging. I mean that, kind of, obviously ties into kind of the way we market ourselves, the way marketing works, but it's all about in the delivery of something. There could be something that's of comparable, two products that are of comparable quality, but you're going to buy the one that was packaged the best. And I'm not talking about how it was just put in a cardboard box, but the packaging, the brand behind it. And nowadays we're getting into an era where we all have personal brands. We are all brands, because Instagram, Twitter, social media, has basically given us the platform to broadcast ourselves to the world, and that kind of gives us that responsibility and privilege to be a brand. But anyway, back to the lyric. Going through this, I was talking about a lot of people are sheep. We don't even know what we like anymore. And I think this is, kind of tends to be, this is a theme that I've been thinking of, kind of a lot recently, which is, how a lot of people don't tend to really think for themselves. We tend to just kind of follow what we see other people are doing, what other people say are cool. We follow that, not based on anything about how we're perceiving something, but it's because we place some amount of trust in another person's opinion, or just other people's opinion, the masses opinion in general, and we choose to follow it without, and it maybe never gives us even an opportunity to have to think for ourselves. But I think this is bringing up some good points about that. uh, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, same thing. David Chappelle said that the one that tastes the best was the one that was paying him the most at the time. So this was actually in reference to a David Chappelle joke that he made. I believe the Pepsi Coca-Cola's thing was, probably most people know that the ingredients are the exact same in the two soft drinks. Yet there's been a various number of psych tests that have basically seen that people have a preference for one or the other, Coke or Pepsi. And even when it's double blinded and they don't know which they're getting, they still think that the one they like is Coke or Pepsi, respectively. But you know, it has a lot, that they aren't able to actually tell which one is which. It's basically the point of those studies is they're showing that it's the way that Pepsi or Coke personally brands, how they brand themselves, how they attract the consumer. And in our brains, we actually link that to thinking that we like the taste of the product better, even though it's actually we like the way that Pepsi or Coca-Cola is giving us the product. So there's some interesting stuff, a lot we could dissect and will dissect in this podcast, which we're going to be talking a lot today about the internet. This this is something the internet has changed a lot with. and something a lot of other Childish Gambino songs talk a lot about. Actually, the title of the podcast, Roscoe's Wetsuit, is based off a Childish Gambino lyric, which I won't get into right now. But what I will get into right now is introducing my guest today is my good friend and former roommate, Alex Eldemir. Probably can attest, one of the best roommates he's ever had. Never any problem doing the dishes. None of that stuff, right? Just
No, no.
perfect. Okay. Thanks. All right. Um, but yeah, Alex is a super interesting guy. We originally met, I believe was it Jesse or Brandon who
Yes.
originally, and it was Jesse. We sat down, we had lunch, and uh, you know, we ended up rooming together the next year. And I think, even I remember that first day, when I sort of helped you move in. I remember like it sort of felt like right off the bat we kind of just, had a connection. Like we just kind of vibed, our conversations were fluid. It wasn't like a forced effort to like talk to one another, and we have a lot of the kind of same interest in shows and music and stuff to talk about. So I think this is going to make for a really interesting show. Um, Alex Alex was a computer science and math major at the University of Oregon, and so I think he has a lot of. I mean, he actually studied, kind of the basis of one of the topics we'll be heavily discussing today. And computer science is obviously, kind of the backbone of the internet revolution and has created all of these kind of cultural changes that we're now kind of adapting to. So I think Alex has a really interesting perspective, which we'll get into a lot on the show. So Alex, welcome. It's an honor to have you as a guest.
Great to be here, Toby. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Well, what we were talking, and one of the things you had mentioned was you were talking about you're going to be giving up your smartphone, huh?
Yeah, I am. And if I could just comment on packaging and how we're delivered stuff.
Yeah.
I was at a tech conference recently, and the one of the I believe it was developers of Tor. Tor is a web browser that's completely anonymous. So basically, your Comcast can't see what you're doing on it. Bad actors can't quite see what you're doing on it. And she was giving examples as to why you would want this level of privacy. Um, and she gave the example of airline tickets. Airlines can actually track through your browser what you're willing to pay for a ticket.
Mm.
So they don't give you what the actual cost of the ticket is. They'll give you what they know you're willing to pay based on what they know about you from your browsing habits, from previous travel, from all these different sources. So if you use this private browser, I don't work for Tor or anything, but this is just what she was presenting. She said you'll find airline tickets, for example, are far cheaper because they know nothing about you. So they give you the actual prices of airline tickets. Um, and part of the way they track you is your smartphone, but it's not very important how they do it. There's a lot of ways to do it. Um, and I'm giving up my smartphone for a month.
Let me, but before you actually explain that and what has brought about that,
Yeah,
idea for that change, I want to just say, like, I mean, that, sounds, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds kind of similar to, what people have noticed, in the past with, something like, with Amazon, where, you know, we may, be browsing on the internet and, we're trying to find a specific product and say we don't end up buying it. And then, a few days later, we're just on a random website. We're not on Amazon. We're on a random website that has ads, and there'll be an Amazon ad that'll pop up with that product. So it's that seemed like kind of the early, maybe this is kind of a progression. Do you think of that kind of way of marketing?
yeah, and they also, as more people use these devices and browse the internet, they get more information. They learn more about you the more you use it. They can even create profiles of people who aren't online just through the people in their contacts or people around them. It's really interesting how aggressive these marketing tactics are. It's what partially what makes Amazon so affordable. It's like a
Mm.
pretty incredible product they offer. They can deliver anything to your door in 2 days, but
It's
they need
crazy.
to,
It's crazy to think about that, right?
yeah,
Like you're anywhere, and it's just crazy to think like they have all these products in some warehouse. I mean, I can't even imagine how big that warehouse. I mean, multiple where
yeah,
wherever whatever city you're in, there's some huge warehouse that has like literally. You think of the diverse thing that I think, and all that goes to just say, yeah, Amazon has become over, I feel like a relatively short period of time, right? It's become quite a giant. I mean, I remember, and this is probably going to make me sound old, but I remember back when like eBay was kind of like the top dog and it was like Amazon was like, oh, you're going to get something from Amazon? Like that seems like that kind of like weird sort of small like book website. And it's like, think about that. And maybe that was what, like, you think 10
yeah.
years ago or something? Yeah. And then just since then, I mean, anything you want, potato chips to your door, you got it, right?
Just think like in the past, people like died to transport food back to exotic fruit or salt or wherever back to their home countries, and now you can get anything you want in the world in 2 days with no risk to yourself or the person delivering it. It's
Hmm.
really like an incredible thing over the last just 100 years.
Right. It is incredible. And that's one of the things, about the internet, and I'm sure we're gonna be touching on a lot of the negative aspects of that, but you're absolutely right that that's one of the things. I mean, we have instant access to all of this stuff, and but at the same time, whether that's what a good or bad thing, I think is up for debate. It sort of reminds me of how today, a lot of very poor or homeless people are actually obese, which is really weird to think about, right? Because usually not having enough money, that had always meant not having enough to buy food. So you would expect, you're skinny, you're starving, like, the kids in Africa we see, we'll see in the news or the media or whatever. But what's crazy, it's like food is not an issue. Like if you're homeless, you're not worried about starving to death. Like because you could easily, you know, scramble up the change to get, whatever from the dollar menu at McDonald's. And this, not to put McDonald's on blast, but like with any kind of fast food nowadays, you can get a lot of very cheap, poor quality food. And you know so it's like relating that back to the internet, it's like in Amazon, it's like sort of that the food, uh, the low cost of poor food is like, you know it's a good thing that people aren't starving, but at the same time it can create, problems of its own, right? Like,
Yeah, and
all the health challenges, the diabetes, we're seeing obesity, that we're seeing in today's society.
we also have way more temptation in today's society. Like I don't know if you ever seen how Safeway is laid out. They put all the junk food or the food that you probably shouldn't get, but is really hard to say no to. You have to walk through it to get to the vegetable aisles on the end. You have to walk by it. And I think like never, but like it's never been like this where you've had this massive amount of temptation all around you, and you have to actually say no to things as opposed to going and getting things.
Yeah,
You don't, it's
abs-
like that. Like it's like it's hard to, not get that soda with your meal because it's so cheap
yeah,
and it tastes good.
yeah, absolutely. You bring up a good point that, yeah, it's like now, you know, uh, I mean, for example, like going, it used to, if you wanted whatever, some jacket, first you would have had to have the original idea, or have it prompted in some way, like, I want to go buy a jacket or whatever.
Yeah.
Then you'd have to make the travel out to a store, go into the store, find where the jacket actually is. And it's like A lot, nowadays you may not even have the idea that you think you want a jacket. You could literally just be mindlessly watching TV. You could be watching a sports game and just be, say it's a commercial break and you're just on your phone, not even listening to the TV, but then something for whatever reason catches your attention. You hear it and you're like, I need this new jacket. You don't have to leave your house. You can literally, with a few clicks, go and buy that jacket.
Yeah, Amazon has one click order. Like you just click
Yeah,
buy
yeah,
there.
it's
And you
crazy.
also don't know, advertising is so targeted now. If for whatever reason, your search history, whatever you've done, if marketers know you're interested in a jacket, they'll start targeting you for, you know, with offers and deals, as opposed to back when everyone kind of watched the same 5 stations. They had to cast a wider net. It wasn't quite as aggressively pursuing just each individual target.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. And oftentimes I think that is able to kind of go on without any, pushback, right? I mean, for a lot of things that were, things that were getting sold that are pretty, relatively harmless, there's not really much interference. But, I think of like, I think maybe the first really big, good example of, when marketing did kind of go a bit too far, at least kind of online and internet marketing, social media marketing. How a lot of the big tobacco companies got sued because they were specifically marketing towards kids, and actually that's something now. I was just reading, I think earlier today, actually, there's about to be a big round of lawsuits against the companies, the pharmaceutical companies that make like OxyContin and some of the other narcotic painkillers involved in the opiate crisis, because it's like, they were unfairly kind of, you know, deliberately marketing their product for stuff that it wasn't supposed to be used for. And the internet, social media, I mean, gives it such a wider scope to be able to hit, a lot of people that, may not need severe, painkillers, but then suddenly they see it on TV and it's like, some, of course, some attractive individual, right, with all those drug ads, it's always like someone who's definitely not taking that drug because they'd probably look really like sick and stuff, it's like, or fucked up, but it's like, someone portraying this ideal life, and it's like the drug has allowed them to live that or whatever.
Yeah,
And
it's like when Facebook, like, or whatever, so any social media company, when you log on, you agree that they can use your data and sell it to advertisers. But the fact that we don't even know, like, I don't know the answer to this question. Like, can they sell data of minors? Like, if a 16-year-old is browsing Facebook, what does their personal data? Where does it go? What happens? Are they protected? Are they
mm,
are they targeted by
and, and
bad
then
actors?
also,
Even not
yeah,
bad actors, by anyone not
uh,
having potentially the full, like, ability to defend themselves in a certain way against
right,
perhaps predatory advertising.
right. And I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I guess
Yeah.
if you're listening and you do, comment, wherever this is posted on YouTube or whatever. But I mean, my guess would be probably there isn't a ton of like censoring, by age, because it's like, you think about how easy it is for, a 13-year-old to go online now and, get very easy access, even if they're not trying to get to like a pornographic site. There's
Hmm.
just going to be like an ad that's going to pop up if they're trying to like, find some TV show, some kids
Yeah.
TV show. Like you don't, and it goes back to the point where we're talking about, you don't actually have to actively seek out any of this stuff anymore. It's literally just being shoved right in our faces. And I don't think there is that, that there isn't much protection, I don't think, anymore for, who goes on the internet. And,
And you could make the argument that it's, the parents or the household, but as this tech becomes more and more ubiquitous, parents don't necessarily even know that this stuff is happening. Also,
mhm,
I don't want to tell them how to parent their child, but if you're not even aware that how this stuff works or how these sorts of things can really damage a young person, like it's not necessarily your fault. Like you're just not aware of it. Uh,
Right. Right.
like
Yeah, not your fault.
hopefully
Yeah.
the next generation, has more understanding of how aggressive this sort of stuff is, so they can do a better job
Hmm.
um, shielding young people and showing them how to use this sort of technology in a
Right.
way.
And yeah. No, and I think that's really the first step is to become aware that it's going on. Because it's like if you even if like our brains are kind of hardwired, from a kind of neuroscience perspective to have a drive and desire for certain things. So when we see that that ad that captivates us on TV, the non-aware thing would be to just mindlessly go, buy the Carl's Jr. burger because there's the newest like, Sports Illustrated swimsuit model,
Yeah,
take you a bite out of the burger. But you know, if we're aware that that's the way our brain is basically working to, and how that we're aware that the marketers are trying to tap into that part of the brain, I think we're less, susceptible to that sort of, you know, I guess, getting sold something kind of without our permission or without our awareness, really. I think
yeah,
that's a big key.
yeah. The humans are like, we work a very specific way, so there are ways to hijack how we operate. Like we're very visual creatures, so strong visuals tend to be very powerful in terms of convincing us to do things. And I mean, nowadays it's so easy to fake visuals or misrepresent them like I don't know if you've seen the deep fake videos where they'll like change the face of an actor to another
Hmm.
actor so they'll look like they're saying something they're not.
Oh, interesting. No,
So like
that's super interesting.
so you can like literally put words in someone's mouth
Hmm.
without you know too much effort. So it becomes also a very tough world to operate in where you can't trust what you're seeing. Um, and
Right.
I don't really see how we're going to how we're going to get around that when we can't even trust video or we can't even trust our eyes. Um, as a visual creature, it's hard to operate in a world where you can't trust what you see.
Right. Yeah, and
What
where you have to constantly kind of be vigilant, protecting yourself from all of these, like all these kind of media infiltrations, and it's not just marketing. It's like, well, for a lot of it, I guess it is, but there's all of these things that are kind of sucking at our attention.
attention
Um,
is the word, yeah.
right? Yeah, and it's like we're in charge of, we all have 24 hours in a day, last time I checked, and people like, people we look up to, Elon Musk, someone like that, he's got the same amount of time in the day that, the guy who's eating Cheetos and, playing Minecraft all day, on the couch, they both have the same number of hours. Like, it's all about how you, divvy up your time and how you actually, a lot of it is being able to, a lot of attention is actually being able to selectively tune out things that are not worth our attention. Because when we think about it, there are like a million, I think there's a number somewhere out there, but there's like a million billion bits of information coming that me and you are, and all of our listeners are kind of processing, each second, where, I could talk about, this yellow bull that I'm seeing in the distance. And if I was that distracted by the yellow bull, if I was actually holding that in my awareness,
Mm-hmm.
along with all of the other stuff in my environment and all of the sounds and all of the smells, like it would be impossible impossible for me to have a conversation because in order to have a conversation that's really and have an attention span is basically being able to tune out most almost everything in your external environment except for kind of that lasering in on what you do want to focus on, right?
And tuning stuff out like is a huge part of being creative. And there is nothing greater as a human than being creative, like creating something out of nothing. And when you have all that noise around you, it can be very hard to just, come up with your own thoughts and get to know yourself and, get to know how, you think and what you feel and these sorts of things. You're constantly being told these things.
Hmm.
And sometimes you just need to really get away from it all. And
Right. And I think that's the perfect segue into talking about something we teased, right at the start, which is, how you're going to be giving up your smartphone. So tell me a little about like how that idea got started, why you felt like there was a need to do this, and then, what you think that's actually going to look like.
well, it started with, I started noticing I'd get some anxiety when I was away from my phone for too long. And it's not necessarily a good feeling once you're aware of it. What? Where's my phone? Where's it? And always having a piece of my brain being distracted and or occupied with the phone or the smartphone, I should say rather. I don't think. I mean, maybe you can disagree with me with this, but I don't think like a phone that just does talk and text is necessarily the same level of distraction because it doesn't quite have as many inputs and as much. You can't just pick it up and start browsing. And so that was the first. That anxiety of being away from my phone was a feeling I was not comfortable with, and the anxiety and like I don't know. I've mentioned this to you before. I like to write, and I find it's very hard to come up with new and good ideas when you're so absorbed with what's going on your phone. You're not actually looking at the world and taking in what's happening around you. You're merely just responding to images or news or whatever the phone is servicing. That's kind of where I started, and I'm not sure how. It'll be interesting. We go our whole, not our whole lives, but we've gone ever since the iPhone came out. Most people have been engaging with it on a daily basis for that entire period, and we're not really sure how that affects our psyche. I suspect it's not super healthy, which is probably why yoga, meditation, these sorts of things are becoming more popular because it's an opportunity to not worry about your phone, to not working out too. That's another great example. You can just go to the gym and not worry about your Facebook or your Instagram or your
Yeah.
Snapchat. You can just be with yourself.
And I think you're bringing up an issue. It's not a new problem. It's like people, there's a reason that, people, especially in the United States now are there's a huge wave of this, yoga and meditation, where I feel like, people are getting super interested in these things because they do see it as like an outlet to escape that constant kind of digital media overload that we all face. And, you know, with your experience, what kind of things like have you found, you talked about, you like to write and, maybe talk a little about like, maybe what activities or, whether it's working out or, what it is for you that sort of gets you in that right headspace where you're getting all of the good ideas and really coming up with all of the new material that you want to write about.
I mean, a lot of it is really just being alone with myself, really alone with myself. And that's hard to do with the smartphone. Um, and I think looking for humor in the boring is also a great, way to be creative, whether it be going to the grocery store, standing in line at DMV, there's stuff going on if you're perceptive. But if you're just engaging with your phone, you're not getting any new input. You're just looking at your screen. You're not taking in how the world as it is. And I think a lot of creative writing is an expression of everyday life packaged in a story or entertaining way. Um, I think that's like a big part of the writer's process, which is just to get out there and see the world as it is and not be distracted by
Hmm.
the phone.
And it's interesting, right? Where it's like the phenomena of kind of, and I'm a writer too, and facing something like writer's block. I don't know if you have the same experience, but it's like for me, it's oftentimes when I'm like forcing myself to like, okay, I got to come up with this idea. I got to come up with what the next paragraph's going to be about. Whereas when I'm writing my best material, it's just flowing. Like it's like literally just go flowing from my head to my, to my fingers. And I think a lot of that is sort of it's material I'm pulling from various areas of my brain, but it's material that's been kind of thought about, hashed over during times where I'm not looking at my phone, not directly, doing something out there in the world, right?
Yeah, I like
And
to say, start small, think big. So to package big ideas into little sentences or just little blurbs, and then to grow them as the ideas come to you. But
mm,
I think that's a big part of it. And sometimes starting small means starting with something a boring kind of premise, and then moving on from that.
mm,
But I also another reason I want to do this smartphone experiment is I worry that we're entering a world where you have to have a smartphone. Like, I wonder if we've hit that point where you can't operate in today's modern world without one.
mm.
I don't know if we've hit that point, but I think we're getting close, and I don't know if that's necessarily a world we want to live in, where or if you don't have a smartphone, you really are truly restricted from participating in society.
I mean, I would say my thoughts are you could survive that way. I mean, there's plenty of people who, the extreme case being monks who are still living, very, non-technology filled lives. And often what's kind of ironic is, oftentimes those are like the happiest people in the world, people who we bring in to do brain scans on. Not me in particular, but, university researchers where they're looking at, okay, like, what is this person's brain doing? Why are, they're talking about, they're talking about all of these incredible experiences and feeling so happy and being able to appreciate like just those day-to-day mundane, like they're not going skydiving, they're not like, you know, like doing all of this like crazy stuff, but they're like finding like the happiness like in the little things, maybe just taking a walk, taking, looking at nature, I would maybe guess. But um one of the things, I think about, uh you know uh, I think it can dramatically change our brain is I guess what I'm trying to say. And it was actually the kind of who the news media has coined the world's happiest man. I don't know if you did you hear anything? Maybe we talked about this before. Is this dude? He's a French scientist turned monk. So he actually wasn't like this his whole life. But it's
Most
this
people
dude.
aren't.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this dude did it completely by choice. As far as his reasoning, I'm not entirely sure, but regardless, he put in, I believe it was, I forgot the exact math, but it was something like, he was meditating 30, 40 years, hours and hours each day, day in, day out. And, he had kind of the best out of all the brain scans. So he was, he's been coined the world's happiest man. And he's gotten all of this, popular like news media coverage. And it's like, it's kind of funny because it's like this dude who's like living a life where he's like completely like well, it's like he first was in that media like sciency sort of world, then
Mhm.
he hopped out of it, and now he's back in talking about all of his experiences and like interviewing with all these like popular media sites, about that moniker, that he's kind of taken on,
Yeah, and
the
it's like
world's happiest man.
it's a natural thing to want to compare yourself to others, but the danger of comparing yourself to people online is they're not presenting themselves as they are. You present your best self or your, whatever your happiest moments or your moments where you look the best or feel the best for the most part. And I think it can be really like tough on young people when they start comparing themselves to people who are online or whatever idealized versions of people. And then you can really, you can enter a place where you start to dislike yourself, which is like the worst thing you can do. Like a lot of life for me is just getting to know myself, like really getting to know myself as a person, and then trying to shore up the parts where, I could improve, but also embracing the parts that are positive.
Right. There's this tweet that I it was rebranded so many times. It was a tweet that I saw on Instagram, and uh, it's very critical of Instagram, but directly what you're talking about. I just read this. I had read this last night that this guy says Instagram has ruined a whole generation's expectations of relationships, work, and everything in between. It has made perfect look normal, so now good has become disposable. So it's like we see people live, that look perfect, that are living these like perfect lives, but really they're just broadcasting like this tiny segment, they could have, done nothing for 3 weeks or something,
Yeah.
they don't post the real. I mean, a lot of this, the reason I wanted to do this podcast is to try to bring a lot of that just real authenticity back, into, dialogue and into kind of media, because a lot of it now I feel like is just, very, uh, it's not at all reality. It's certain portions of reality, certain people's reality, but then when we set that as like the bar, where it's like we view, oh, it's like I thought I was having a good day, but then I see like whatever, Kylie Jenner, you know, driving the newest
Yeah.
whatever the hell she drives, Mercedes or something. It's like then it's like, oh fuck, did I have a good day? But, in reality, it's like, why are we basing our judgments of how we're doing, on, why is that getting changed by, what we're seeing someone else do, right?
Yeah,
It's
some of the most followed people on Instagram are models or people who really live these glamorous and probably unrealistic lifestyles. And they're probably not all good either. It's like they might want to trade it for a lifestyle where they're not constantly being photographed. They're not constantly being criticized by the internet. Like there are downsides to it too that we don't see.
mm,
This is also like we've talked about this before with using the internet properly and internet hygiene and how to really, I mean, it's a tough problem to solve. How to really, you know, navigate this probably the most complicated thing ever invented. If we're truly honest, it might just be the most complicated thing that's ever been invented. Um,
and
like, yeah, go ahead.
sorry
Sorry.
to cut you off, but no, as you've previously said, as we've kind of talked about, when the internet came out, there was no user's manual. There was no, here's how you use it, here's how not to screw yourself over using it, here's how to use it properly. Um, but yeah, it's totally. I mean, this idea you mentioned of internet hygiene, I haven't even heard that term before, but I'm sure that, is maybe one, that's gonna start being used more and more as we think about and, inform ourselves about the pros and cons of all this stuff we're doing, right?
And it's a kind of double-edged sword too, because on one hand, like when I search something on Google, they're manipulating what I'm seeing. But for most cases, that's a good thing. Like you don't want like if I look up, you know, how to tie my shoes, I want a very succinct maybe article on how to tie my shoes with pictures and I want them to give me the best sort of website to learn this thing. But I'm also putting a lot of trust in them to show me how to do it properly. And you have to be aware that, you know, these sorts of things aren't infallible. You know,
Right.
we,
Like
we
hopefully you'll eventually like find the site that works for you so you finally learn to tie your shoes, right?
I can tie my shoes just fine, but
All right, all
for
right.
those of you
Just
out
had to point that out for all the listeners, right? For
there,
any of those who are doubting.
and I think it's like it's a tough problem to solve. How do we, show people what they want to see and what they're after on the internet, but also be aware that not everything we're being shown is correct or accurate or honest. Um, and
And yeah, no, I totally I agree with you. And it's like, I think we think that we want to see all of this stuff that's glamorous and beautiful and perfect, but I think in another way we want to see reality. We want to like we love, and speaking for myself along with I think, our culture, we love, you know, the good movie, Rocky, about the comeback story and, you know, the superhero having to go through all the battles and all the tough times, to make it out onto the other side. We like seeing that sort of fight and overcoming obstacles, but for whatever reason, we don't see that like on social media. We don't see Kylie Jenner like writing out a business plan, or I don't know if she does that stuff, but probably not.
like
We
we don't
don't, we don't
even
see the struggle.
like we never see in media people actually using their smartphone. It's very rare actually. In movies or TV shows, these universes that are created don't have phones and don't use them the way we do, which is interesting. It's like how how is it that what we find entertaining isn't what we spend most of our time doing? Um,
Mhm.
and that's something to think about. Like, why is it that we don't see these smartphones in films, in TV, when they're such a big part of our lives?
Yeah.
We see cars, we see all sorts of other technology, and we even see TVs, but we don't see phones or these smartphones, these crazy devices that can do so much for us.
Do you think it has anything to do with like, because like looking at it externally, it kind of seems pretty mundane, right? Like
Yeah,
it's almost like we're watching a reflection of ourselves, if we were to see that, right?
too
Do you
real.
think do you think that has yeah, do you think
Yeah,
that has something to do with why we don't see that?
and it's I think yeah, it's not super. Maybe engaging with the device is interesting, but watching someone else engage with the device is quite boring because one, you're not engaging with it, and two, you can't see what they're engaging with. Um, but yeah, it's it's tough to handle like all these sorts of like the power of a cell phone alone
Mm,
just to be able to talk to anyone in the world. That was a big invention, and now we can not only talk to everyone, but we can like engage with anyone we want. Think how many like Facebook friends you have, and how many people you follow on Instagram. Like trying to keep all that in your brain is really hard. Like I've seen, I don't, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've seen like most people at any given time have 60 to 100 friends, like in real life that they engage with. Yet, why is that number so much higher online? Do we value those friendships less? Probably. Um,
and I read something in I think some psychology thing about how we're kind of evolutionarily hardwired to have kind of like our web to sort of be like, I think the number was like around like 200 people that we know, on various degrees, but it's like, yeah, it's like, you know now it's like an infinity. I mean, because you could add friends of friends of friends of friends, like there's no limit. And really, you could kind of talk to whoever you want online. And I think that's actually a cool kind of part of it, is like, it's giving people a chance to be able to get in touch, um, with people that otherwise they may have never even met,
yeah.
or at least that it would be a lot harder. I mean, and it's crazy just the different sort of mediums of communication. Like, I think about like when FaceTime came out, like, I've heard all sorts, like people like, with relatives, in some, other country, where, they haven't actually like seen each other in person for like, 10 years or whatever, but then they see each other on FaceTime. It's like
Yeah.
that's the coolest thing ever, right? Like that's revolutionary. So
Mhm.
it's like what we're talking about. It's like all these things. It's like they're like the internet, social media. Like these things are all tools. Like that's the way I view them. And tools are not good or bad. Like you could use a
Mhm.
hammer to build a house, you could also use a hammer to hit yourself on the head and knock yourself out. Like,
There's something.
yeah, it's all a tool. It's just,
Yeah,
it's up to the user to how they're going to use it, right?
but there's the risk of like a lot of stuff on the internet is designed to produce a positive response. So you can get very addicted to it. So like, I think it can be very tempting to check your Facebook all the time because you want to see updates, or it's very like pleasing when someone comments or someone says something. You get like this dopamine rush. That's great. But then when you're not getting that dopamine rush, you're kind of in this period of anxiety and anticipation that doesn't feel very good until you get
Right.
that positive feedback. And just going long periods of anticipation and anxiety with small bursts of dopamine, I feel like are tough. And then we just, we start to maybe resent it a little, but also feel like we're trapped using it.
Yeah, I could 100% agree with you. And I think it can also create a lot of like kind of sticky situations where it's like if we're tying our kind of happiness or satisfaction to like say how many likes you're getting on a picture you post on Instagram. Say each like is kind of represents when you see that like that's sort of like your brain's getting a little hit of dopamine, and dopamine is what's kind of the pleasure neurotransmitter. It's involved in drive and kind of wanting to keep doing things again and again and again and reward. All pretty much all addictive drugs in some way or another target dopamine. And, a lot of ways social media is it does have a drug like effect kind of on the brain. I mean, a huge, maybe more so than a drug, right? Like, um, but, as far as that goes, I think, I don't know if you have any other comments on that. I think
It's almost amazing that we're able to handle that level of distraction. I mean, for the vast majority of human history, most people didn't leave their village, let alone have access to all the information in the world for the most part.
hmm
I mean, it's incredible what you can learn on the internet, like
right.
through whether it be online education or just ebooks. Like, there's a lot of really cool stuff, but really, I think it's all in moderation. You don't want it to take over. And I think
hmm
it's going to be very easy just to recede to your room and never leave your room, never experience the world, and just experience it through the filter of your phone. You can now order food to your door. You can order any item you want with Prime. And it's just like, it's this amazing tool, as we've kind of talked about, but that you really can never leave your house and feel like you're living a full life, but not realize
hmm
sometimes just being out in the world is really, really fun. And
Yeah, it's
especially with
something.
the distraction of your phone. Like, I've started going out when I can without, once I give it up for the month, that'll be a whole other thing. But I've just been experimenting a little lately with when I go to the supermarket, just not take my cell phone with me. Just leave it at home and just focus on the task at hand with no sort of external distractions, and not feel like I'm busy the whole time. Let myself
Yeah,
doze off, or check out a little when I'm waiting in line to get my
yeah,
food ringed up or rung up.
yeah. I think that's an awesome like just habit to integrate. And before we expand on that anymore, I just want to go back to concluding kind of the other point that I kind of got
Okay.
distracted on, which was, when we're sort of basing our happiness level on, how many likes say we're getting on a picture. It's like, okay, say we post a picture and get 100 likes. Then that's sort of the baseline, right? So it's like, then say the next picture we posted, we got 150, you got 150 likes. Then you're like, this is awesome. Like, you're getting like even more and more dopamine. You're getting more and more reward activity. But then say you post a picture and you only get 70 likes. There's someone out there who would, 70 likes is going to be like the most likes they've ever gotten on a picture and who would think that's crazy.
Mhm.
But it's all relative. It's all like your baseline is all relative based on, kind of what you're used to. And I think that's scary and kind of it puts a lot of our own like self-esteem, I think, in other people's hands, where it's like, you know, even though people aren't judging us, face to face, they're kind of virtually judging us, by, how many likes we get on a picture. And I think it's actually a really interesting idea that Kanye West proposed a little while ago of like he actually like asked, I think the founder of Instagram to like put like basically install a mode which would abolish likes. Like so you could post and not, and like obviously that would change everything because like we think of, a post as kind of good or bad based on the amount of likes, but it's like, you know what, a post that, something you post that's like, it's like goes back to the marketing. It's like if you post something absolutely crazy, you know, like, oh, I'm in Thailand, like, whatever, like something that's like, cool, like you went on vacation, you're having this amazing time. That'll obviously get a lot more likes than if you're gonna like, you know, take a picture of like, I don't know, that tree, and then like you could literally just take a picture of a tree and like explain in the picture like why, and like all the things that you're perceiving, but at the end of the day, it's like it's probably not gonna get that many likes because it's a tree, like
Yeah, there are
a
definitely some
visual.
things that definitely are more rewarded in a sense in terms of likes, in terms of how many people see your post and you know how it captivates our limited attention spans. Like maybe might not be willing to read a big block of text below a picture to make it more clear. We just want the picture to communicate exactly what it's showing us,
Mm,
and then
mm,
move on to the next post and keep just that back and forth. But
right.
it all starts with like that, like getting comfortable. I really think getting comfortable with yourself and being confident in yourself without letting external factors necessarily dictate how you feel about yourself.
Right, right. And it's I think a nice segue into like talking about, I mean, I think it's scary, just the, kind of the state in which like kids nowadays are kind of growing up in, which is like, where they're constantly tied to this, all sorts of whatever digital devices, and obviously not all of it's bad. They could get a lot of education and stuff out of that, um, but as far as like the social media stuff and like cyberbullying, we hear about, it's like that's something me and you, because are you 23 now? You're 23 and I'm 22, and it's like we grew up kind of experiencing, like we kind of remember what it was like before this stuff took over in the way it did. Like I don't know about you, but I remember like I'm just thinking like kids that see this now are gonna be like, this dude is old as fuck. Like just by me saying this is like, I think about like MySpace or whatever, like was like the coolest. Like I was like, I remember like, I made a MySpace account, without my mom's permission, or whatever, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is like such a rebellious thing,
Yeah.
and it was like, but still like, I mean that was kind of at least my and maybe other people's kind of intro to like social media, but I mean, I don't think I got that till I think I was like middle school, right? But
Yeah. And
which
also,
is
you don't have the ability as a kid to go home and get away. Like the second you're on social media, people know where to find you 24/7 online. Like you don't have that escape when it's like you have a bad day at school, and then when you get home though, it's all gone. You're just with your family, with your parents. Like you have like a bit of a safe spot to really reconvene and collect yourself, and you don't feel like you're under this constant noise of either attack or even praise or whatever, or just you
mm,
have some just time with your family and where you can really develop as opposed to constantly being targeted or whatever it's being used for.
right. Like,
But
did you notice like, like say, when, because I guess just to back up a little bit, I feel like, as I was telling you before, I think like, sort of like, I think of when the little, iPod Shuffle, I feel like kind of was like the start of it all. Maybe other people could like point to a different device, but I feel like once that came out, then it was like, all right, everyone's hooked on iPods, and then once they came out with the touch, it was like a touchscreen. Like this is crazy.
Yeah,
This off, and along with other smartphones coming out, like that obviously kind of, blew up, the possibilities of, what you could use a phone for. And then, obviously, MySpace blew up pretty big, but, obviously not nearly to the degree that, afterwards Facebook did. And I
yeah,
think Twitter was maybe around the same time, you think?
yeah. Twitter's that then. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Well, Twitter
Little,
was originally developed internally for, I believe, Square or some other company that Jack
uh,
Dorsey worked at. It was just a communication app internally in their company. That, hey, this might be a fun thing for everyone to interact with, which, you know, it's kind of had a weird origin where it's what it's used for now was not what it was built for. Which
right.
again,
Yes, that,
Facebook and all these things like Facebook. I mean, everyone knows the sort of most people know the sort of Facebook from the movie Social Network, which obviously glamorizes it. But for the most part, like it wasn't. They really shifted towards more family and oriented stuff, and really trying to promote that sort of environment where like your mom can post pictures on Facebook, but the teenager could also use Facebook to like pages, or young people could use it to join events. Like there's all these different. Everyone has their different reasons for using it, which is probably what makes it so attractive, despite
mhm,
the fact that you give up a lot going on Facebook. Once you're on Facebook, it's hard to rewind the tape. You don't get to just
mhm,
delete your account. You can like deactivate it, but it's very hard to actually like remove yourself from it.
mm, right,
Point where
right.
like there are even pages of people who passed on, like passed away. Like it's like
Yeah,
there's millions of those. It's kind of creepy in a way. These things just stick around, and I feel like had that been packaged more clearly to my parents, or I don't know, at 13 I would have cared, but at least my parents would maybe taken a closer look at it. But
mhm,
these sorts of when you click accept to make your account, you don't read all that stuff. You don't read what they're but when you upload a picture to Facebook, Facebook owns it. Like
mhm,
that makes me not want to upload pictures to Facebook. I don't like
yeah,
that I lose my ability to keep that property. Like it becomes,
right,
and it's free, so it makes sense that they're gonna take advantage of the fact that they can gather information about you and learn about you to sell to advertisers. But not to beat a dead horse, but yeah, like that's something that I think could be more clearly articulated to people when using these applications. Although there's
right.
benefit to the company to do it.
Yeah, and it's like you mentioned, about like being 13 and maybe not caring about some of the stuff. And it's like, how about a 7-year-old, like,
Yeah.
because like, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, I feel like it's younger and younger ages. And I'm just curious, like, how do you think, our kind of early childhoods, kind of before we were kind of like heavily on, like I feel like high school, I don't know about you, but I feel like high school is kind of the start of like heavy, kind of everyone using social media and it really just blowing up. But like, I'm curious, what do you think, like, how do you think like our development was kind of like different, with kind of
One
like
one
somewhat removed
point,
from that?
yeah, calling like a house with like a landline. I always like that like method because the parent of the household would pick up, they'd ask who was calling, you would have to talk to the adult, explain. There wasn't all this just messaging going on behind the scenes where there's more opportunities for kids to be mean to each other. There's more of a gatekeeper element to it. And again, I mean, I'm sure there are parents who are very vigilant about social media use and stuff, but it takes time for people to catch up and start to realize that this sort of stuff is happening.
Hmm.
And I just hope more people are a little bit, more cautious when introducing these sorts of things, um, given how it can be challenging to navigate. It really can be.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, It's very true. I mean, I think, I think I was thinking, I've thought more about like kind of just like the neurological, like, development, like how, like attention spans, like how, kind of like you said, how you don't any longer kind of have to like go out of your house, like, and I think like a lot of the great moments as a kid were, it was nothing like crazy necessarily. It was just you're playing at a sunny park with your friends and, kicking a soccer ball around or something. It's like, and I feel like, I don't know, I feel like that is maybe getting kind of lost. Like maybe now, I mean, I feel like kids are like playing soccer, with their friends in an indoor house, from the privacy of their rooms, on some app. Like,
I also
and
think
it's not the same. Like,
part of how like sports for young people are constructed nowadays encourages more of that. Like I don't know, like I always felt like in high school, like it really like sports and competitive stuff really catered to the top 5% of students. You know, you have a bunch of kids try out and they'd cut most of them and then they'd have the team and those who got cut couldn't play soccer. Like it just was a very difficult thing. There's competitive leagues. There's just I really feel like high schools and schools in general could do a better job of encouraging young people to participate in competitive events or and
mm,
learn to work with maybe people who have different skill levels or different abilities or different just are gifted athletically in different ways because a lot of life is learning how to interact with maybe people who are different than you or aren't just if you're just playing with the best soccer players you're not going to know how to handle a situation where you're dealing with someone maybe who has a different set of skills than you, but you need to be able to work with them. Like
mm,
when I played when I was rowing, our team wasn't co-ed, but we traveled together with the women. We would take the bus to the lake with the women. We would have land practice at the same location. So a lot of energy went into working with people at different skill levels. Varsity athletes would train sometimes with freshmen, and these sorts of like more interesting dynamics really were beneficial to me. Whereas, back in high school, you were just with the people who made the team, which were people who were very competent.
right.
I think that skill is a really valuable one, and we shouldn't discourage people from trying to better themselves or compete just because their skill levels might vary. But and yeah, it sounds like everyone's a participation trophy, but
I was gonna ask actually, yeah, that was the next thing I was gonna ask you is just like your thought on like,
there'll still
I
be winners
mean,
and losers in the competition. You just have to work with a different and more varied group. Like for
interesting.
example, why don't men and women play like soccer together? I mean, there's obviously practical reasons in like football, whereas like if someone is very very small, they get very very hurt. But like a non-contact sport, I don't see why not personally in terms of learning to work with, you know, in this case, maybe you could do co-ed. Like I always find those way more fun too. Like you still win or lose the game, but if there are 4 women and 4 men on each team, you have a more interesting, maybe team-driven dynamic that you might have not had if it was just the same skill level.
Uh-huh.
Um, but again, well, we've talked about how this might not even be an issue in the future with gene editing and messing around with that sort of stuff. Where I don't know how close we are. Probably not close at all. But this
I
is more
mean,
your line.
oh yeah, I mean it's like, we see it, in sports with, with doping with, say Lance Armstrong and it's like, sure like testosterone shots have been around for who knows how long, that's pretty basic form of doping, but it was like I don't know if you read like the in-depth on like Lance Armstrong, like he wasn't some idiot who was just shooting himself up with testosterone and then sat on the couch and then somehow won some Tour de France trophies. Like people might try to paint him in that light now that he's come out as a cheater, but that's not how it was. It was like he had like a team around him that would like, they would put together like, okay, you gotta like take this amount of this, you know, it could be, a medication, like the EPO he was using, the or EPO, which I believe like increases like red blood cells, or is it white blood cells? Doesn't matter, but basically, helps kind of promote, oxygen, or the longer. I shouldn't even be talking about this because I'm not an expert on what EPO does, but the point being, it was all very targeted things. The blood transfusions, I don't know if you read, like he would have people like literally come in, or he would wake himself up at like, various points during the night he would have to get up and walk around the tent where, where they were staying so his blood wouldn't clot, because,
It's so
right? Like
scary.
it's so scary, but it's like that is what the extent he went to, and it was like it was not just him, and that's been well documented. Like so, it's like you think of like kind of a whole sport in a large way, going to these crazy measures to basically, hack. And that's kind of a newer term. The whole idea of biohacking is one thing I'm really passionate about. But that was kind of maybe before there was that term. But where we see this, where people are going to all sorts of measures, whether it's you know whether it's sleep. I mean, sleep is one of the biggest. We see performance differences in athletes in, in like snipers. There was some study about like, 8 hours of sleep. They're hitting the target however many times, and then it's like 7 hours of sleep. Their performance like halves, and then it's like 6 hours. Like it's like a very steep decline. And so it's like whether it's sleep, whether it's like drugs, whether it's nutrition now is like, really coming, to like, I think just the talk about different diets is like at an all-time high. It seems like I feel like we're very like, especially with the demanding world we live in, like we already are using all of the technologies that are currently available to us to sort of hack, whether it be athletic or cognitive performance. But you're right that, once there is this whole new wave of, editing genes and, being able to turn on and off certain genes, because we know like with the field of epigenetics, it's not simply the genes that you're born with that make all the difference. It's whether those genes get the signal to turn on and do their job, or if or not. It's like
And
to
where do
to
we draw the
explain.
line?
What's that?
Right now, we have a pretty clear line between like what it means to be doping on a competitive level. Like you can do certain steroids are totally legal, but the second you want to compete, they become banned.
Right.
But what happens when we start turning on and flipping on genes in humans? At what point do we draw the line of competition or even sense of self? I think there's a real risk with this sort of stuff of a loss of sense of self identity in terms of like, am I really the person I was supposed to be, or am I just like this because someone messed around in there?
Mm, right.
And
Right. And it's like when we see other people, like if they're doing all these things and then it's like if we don't do that to keep up, we're going to get left in the dust, and then our self-esteem is going to plummet because we're not keeping up, right?
yeah,
Do you think that's also?
or what if you have a more extreme case of like we use gene mapping and we find that a baby has a certain mapping that's associated with a very high risk of cancer in their 30s.
Right.
What these sorts of things, it's like how do we handle that ethical question? On one hand, there's a certain like obligation to understand how these things work to help prevent and save lives, but on the other hand, you don't want information about yourself that you can't change that's just catastrophic on your psyche.
Right.
Ruins the time you do have.
Right. Right. And it's like I feel like a lot of people like, wouldn't want to know their death date. Like,
And AI
it
is
would,
pretty good at guessing it if they know
which
you
is
know.
which
And
is scary, right?
yeah, as we get more information, it's like, I mean, it's really cool in terms of, like, for example, look at like breast cancer. If you get regularly checked as a woman, there's a very good chance you will never die of it. Because if they catch it early, same with skin cancer, catch it early, it's very, very not easy, but we have ways to deal with it. But if we catch it late, it's almost impossible to deal with. So it's like, there's like an obligation to check, but there's also like you can't be living your whole life in fear of something's
Right.
going to catch you at some point. Like that's part of what makes life so great is the finite nature of it.
Right.
But
Right. Do you think AI has, had a really big contribution to like just our ability to understand like,
well, it lets
different
us
genes and diseases?
well
Is that
it lets us like handle really large data sets that like no human get their hand around. But fundamentally, I think the word AI is thrown around a little too loosely.
yeah, like me for instance, it's like I always like if you were to like ask me like define AI, like I would probably struggle to
I would
do
ask
that.
you, what's even intelligence? How would you define intelligence? What do we even, is it raw IQ, or is it something else? Like what makes something intelligence? And I would argue unpredictability is part of intelligence, whereas artificial has the capability to solve complex problems, but in a predictable way.
Mm,
Um,
right.
and like I mean, although I have the weird experience. I don't know if you use Gmail, but they have, when you type an email, they have like the continuation of the sentence, and it's really good at guessing what you're going to say
Uh,
based on what you've said. But it would never be able to guess what you're going to say before you start typing the email, or it would have a much more difficult time, or it would need different factors. It wouldn't just need the information that you previously typed in the email. It would need to know who you're emailing. It would need to know perhaps previous correspondence. So it would need different levels of input to handle it.
right.
So
Right.
kind of guess what you're going to say next. If you use the word thank, there's a very good chance you is going to come next. It's not a difficult prediction for the machine to make based on all the times people have said thank.
Right. So it almost sounds like you're kind of saying like, I mean, if we just look at like human intelligence, do you associate kind of unpredictability, in whatever kind of do you associate that with like sort of higher intelligence? Because I think there's definitely a connection there with creativity, with thinking out of the box, not following kind of the herd mentality, where it's like there's unpredictability in being original and coming up with
Yeah.
new ideas, right? Like
Because
what
when
do you
you're confines of your phone, it's almost pretty easy for them to predict what you're going to like, for example. Whereas if you just picked a random person on the street and like tried to guess what they liked based on what they were maybe wearing, it would be a lot harder.
yeah.
So really what it takes is unpredictability goes down as information goes up. And a lot of AI is traversing trees that contain information, each node will contain information, and then making guesses based on many, many iterations. That's kind of like, at least if you take an AI course, you'll see a lot of that, a lot of math, a lot of
Right.
solid stuff. I mean, it's very like, there shouldn't be, when AI does something, you shouldn't necessarily be too shocked unless, you know, you introduce side effects, which is totally possible. But for the most part, like when we construct trees for AI with information coded in them, we're not necessarily surprised at the fact that it gives a response because that's what it's designed to do.
hmm
Um,
And obviously like immensely helpful, right? I mean to all sorts of fields, whether that be medicine or, you know, I mean tons of other I mean AI is obviously, like we're talking about the hot new term, that's kind of being thrown around and used in
it's,
all sorts of disciplines, right?
yeah, I mean, it can be applied to many things, but I think, yeah, I do think like we get this weird idea that it's like inherently dangerous, which I don't think it is. Like it's humans are dangerous because they're the ones building these sorts of things. At the end of the day, someone had to write the code or a formula or whatever that made the thing go haywire. It's not
Yeah.
like it's not like you're letting a rabid dog loose in a room of crowded people where you kind of don't know who it's going to grab. You should have an idea that's going to grab someone.
Right.
Um,
I feel like yeah, there's definitely like a lot of like power and lessening of danger by like no, all this information AI is giving us and all of the math. But I think like, one of the things that if we bring it to say the field of like health, say, AI can predict if you have a certain gene or a certain set of genes that say, you've got I'm not going to say super high, but say you got like a 70% chance of dying of breast cancer when you're 65. So it's like I feel like there's going to be certain people that are going to take that information and they're going to be like, well, shit, I gotta like live all my life before I hit that point because
Yeah.
chances are I'm gonna be dead, like statistically speaking. But then, I mean, where I kind of fall is like sort of, I mean, it's following math and statistics, but I guess in a sort of different way where it's looking at kind of what I'm really interested in is like epigenetics and how all of the things like how our diet, how all the the air we breathe, the activities we do, the input we take in, the just what all of our behaviors and actions and thoughts, how that actually shapes the expression of our genes. So it's like say that person, let's keep with that example of the person that has a 70% chance of dying of breast cancer, the woman who has a 70% chance of dying of breast cancer, say when she hits 65. So what if she didn't have that information? Maybe she would actually like live a lot healthier of a life. Like do you think I mean it seems like there's kind of a danger of not knowing, obviously, but then at the same time, there's like more of a psychological danger of knowing.
But what
How
if
do
you,
you,
if like, there's also the risk of your data, perhaps you check off things as I don't, if there's anything that, I don't want to know anything about my death or anything. I just want to know about things I can do, like perhaps to reduce the risk of, heart disease or, whatever your mapping comes back with. You don't want anything dangerous. But the second you get your genome mapped, if that gets into the wrong hands, people have a mapping of your genome and can tell you terrible things about yourself.
and the other thing I feel like is people are like, we're just naturally curious. Like you think about kids, they're always like getting into places they're not supposed to get into. Doing, exploring, doing things they're not supposed to do. And it's like, I feel like that's a lot, how a lot of like science has progressed is like, following, new innovative kind of things that were previously told to like stay away from or it's too dangerous or this or that. But I mean, I just feel like, gosh, like, do you think I feel like a lot of people may have a hard time sort of resisting that temptation. Like if it is somewhere, like if there is a report somewhere that says, that there's a 70% chance you're gonna die of cancer when you're 65, like how like are you really going to be able to live day in day out without knowing that? Like I feel like I'd have a hard time like not
Yeah,
clicking that,
yeah,
entering, opening that window per se.
yeah. It's a dangerous territory to enter where we're gonna be able to just understand. We understand so well in certain aspects, how these sorts of things are formed, or the sort of odds. And again, they're just odds, though, so it's not like it's a guarantee. It's
But I think it often gets misinterpreted as a guarantee because when we think of like, oh, there's like 70% chance of something happening, like if you look at the weather report and it says 70% chance of rain, you're like, oh, it's gonna rain tomorrow.
gonna take an umbrella.
You're gonna take an umbrella.
Yeah,
So it's like even like I think that's an important distinction, and it's important that we kind of tease those apart because it's like you do still have the opportunity to affect a very great kind of percentage, and those are just odds based on average normal people, right? Like it's um like do you think AI kind of eliminates a lot of just kind of the individual differences that exist amongst all of us, or like where it kind of just groups us all into
again,
categories, or
I would really think of AI as complicated math that makes good guesses. Like that's what
okay.
we're kind of at right now. Like
How
whereas
about
it's
yeah,
there's like I don't know if you've heard of something called the Turing test, and
yeah.
an AI passes the Turing test when it can trick a human into thinking it's also human. We're not even close. The closest we came was there was a software developed by a chatbot developed in Russia, and it was able to trick people for about 5 minutes into thinking it was human. But they told the participants that the subject they were talking to was a child. So they kind of skewed how it worked. And I mean, maybe more recently something has come out, but as of like a couple of years ago, that was it. That was the best we got. And Turing himself predicted we would have something past Turing test in the year 2000. So it's slow going. It's tough when we're kind of hamstrung by the fact that we don't understand how even consciousness works or what it is. Like when we can't define everything, it's very hard to develop something to replicate it. And would we even want to? Humans are imperfect, so we don't necessarily. There's not necessarily a motivation to create something exactly human, because you get something that's not quite human, but imperfect.
Right. Yeah, because it's like all about, I mean, all this technology is, in a lot of ways able to do things in a way we can't do, and I think that's,
We invent it.
what's awesome. That's why yeah, because it can crunch all of these numbers that previously you would have to have a calculator and be doing that for how many hours, how many days, or guess what? Before the calculator was invented, you'd have to be like scribbling that out. You'd be having that like hand add all of those. Like think about how long, that could take your entire lifetime to add up something that AI could probably calculate in what, like a couple seconds, a
Well, they can also
millisecond,
be used
right?
in bad ways. Like it was interesting. They found recently that people respond, or at least are more likely to click a negative headline than a positive one. So if you are generating AI that presents news to people, it's going to prioritize the bad news if your goal is to maximize attention and clicks. And just to wrap it up and bring it back to that whole idea of targeting, this idea of using AI to figure out what gets people to interact with your content the most. Typically it's negative stuff, unfortunately, that people want to see. And I don't know if
And
that's
that,
a product of our society or just like a product of humans being interested in kind of stuff that's morbid, or maybe it's a comparison. Oh, at least I'm not being torn apart in a shark attack, or my city wasn't ravaged by an earthquake, or whatever it is. Like there's something about negative news that in the moment feels good, but in the long run I think bums you out, or kind of puts you in a bad psychological state.
I agree. That's actually, yeah, that's definitely a big part of the reason I don't ever watch the news. Like I will, I subscribe to this website, shout out, or I guess it's more like a newsletter, like that goes to my email, shout out the Skim. Like I think it's a really good uh, sort of media, modality, because it's just giving me kind of like these snapshots of the things that are going around, like happening in the world, but it's not necessarily like negatively skewed per se. Like it's just, or kind of based off, political stuff. And that's how I stay informed. But as far as that goes, like I feel like, I mean, I think there's huge, kind of health and psychological consequences to watching the news, because it's basically putting us in that fight or flight mode, where, it's not necessarily, there's not a direct danger to us, but we can get convinced that there is. We see stuff on TV, and we see, you know, say, school
Like fires,
shootings,
for example, right now.
fires, wait, what?
Amazon's is burning right now, and
Right, right.
it's a real bummer. But like personally, there's nothing I can do about it, and there's something very frustrating about knowing something bad is going on. But being just being so in a different sphere that all you know is something bad is going on, and there's a fine balance between
Right.
being informed and then stressing about stuff that you have no ability to really change in your current
Mm,
position. And you
yeah.
got to
And
balance
it,
those things.
yeah. And that obviously, like that's something that annoys me immensely about politics is like, or just talking about politics, because it's like often you're bickering with someone else about, what an individual or a couple individuals are doing, which you basically have no control over. Like
And
I
yeah,
I can control whether I pay attention to that or not, but I can't control what those people are actually, gonna do, or so I just see it as like, why don't we have discussions about stuff we can in some way control, or at least have some kind of influence over? Like me and you, I can't control you. I can't have like you're not like a doll or whatever, like on a, you know,
marionette.
pulley or whatever. Yeah, but it's like I can influence you. I can be like, yo man, like this this phone, super cool. You should get one. Like, and it's like it's obviously not always that overt, but it's like
But you're
everything influences us. Like each person, we all influence each other.
yeah. But at
So I
least
think,
you have a
yeah,
face to it. So like you recommend me a phone and it sucks. I know not to trust you with phone stuff. Whereas when you're being influenced and you don't realize it, you can start making poor decisions without even realizing why you're making the poor decisions. It's that can be very that can be more difficult. There's something very honest about having a conversation with somebody where you're committing to your what you're saying, your convictions or your ideas, as opposed to just either agreeing or just arguing for the sake of arguing, not really being productive about it, or not trying to reach some insight or understanding about yourself or others. Like I mean, I've seen a lot of studies on like political orientation, and a lot of it is about half of it is just you're born either feeling, you're kind of born with being right or left or whatever, and the other half is environment. So it's
mhm.
like these sorts of factors. It's like what makes you this way. It's like, well, some of it you can't even control, um, and I think letting all that go can be very, very healthy. I think,
Yeah. I mean, I haven't. I
and
mean
I,
that.
if something's important, I'll find out about it. Someone will tell me.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Yeah, yeah.
Right?
If it's life threatening,
Yeah.
yeah, someone will hopefully tell me. Um, yeah, I think, there's a lot of things to unpack in that, but you know, I I think it's often, with just, health in general, back to that. I mean, everything like, our intelligence, or, our risk of getting different diseases, or our athletic ability. These things are all partly genes, partly things that we're born with that are there, and they do definitely shape behavior and traits and all this stuff. But at the same time, there is so much of like environment and how the genes and environment interact. I mean, that's the whole field of epigenetics. I mean, there's so many complex interactions that occur. I think it's doing the best with the cards you're dealt, right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we'll get to the point where, there'll be, kind of these like super. You think there'll be like a point? I mean, I feel like it's gonna come where there's like these super kids that are gonna get born, like, because we're gonna know so much. So it's gonna be like, we're gonna be able to like, program the exact desired genes, like,
Yeah.
and make that kid a brilliant like math wizard who's also 6'7" and is gonna dunk on everyone.
Yeah. It's and the question is, should we or not? And I don't have an answer to that.
Do you think? I mean, does the do you know like what the latest is with the law? Because I know it used to be like, I mean, there was that huge thing with like Polly. Remember that? Like the sheep. I think that was
Yeah.
like, was that like 1985, or I think somewhere around there, maybe
What was that?
more. Polly, the sheep that they like, that was like the first creature that they did like genetic manipulation on, or it was like the first, like where that it was the product. It was like born having like the embryo, or whatever, like genetically manipulated or something. But
Well,
there
I mean,
were like there were tons of ethical concerns when that happened, and it's like that's a sheep. Like, like when it
Yeah,
comes to humans, what do you know anything about it? Like the state of that?
there
Like,
was these they definitely messed with in China recently with certain genes in unborn children that had to do with preventing HIV.
mm,
And it turned out to be the scientific community was pretty upset with it. It's a pretty big ethical breach. I don't see us anytime soon doing that just because we don't know the long-term consequences. And anytime science can't clearly outline what potential long-term risks are, we don't do it.
right.
Because if a
And
child dies at 8 years old because flipping that gene messed some other sequencing up,
right,
all of a
right,
sudden you've committed murder, basically.
right. I mean, yeah, it's a tricky situation because it's like if there's that existence now of that where it's like eh, so basically wait the way you explain it, so it's like there's basically something that we can do before a baby's born to greatly decrease their genetic chances of developing HIV.
That was the theory. I'm not a geneticist. I don't understand.
Yeah.
I do know that it had some negative effects on the children.
We'll give like a disclaimer like right below right below your face, like not a geneticist.
Yeah, like I'm not even comfortable. All I know is there was something with that there was some backlash, and I think
Yeah.
also I don't know. I'm always like trying to better myself. I don't know. Like, can you imagine being like born perfect? Like, what would you do with yourself?
Mm,
One, there'd be an immense amount of pressure on you to produce something worthwhile to society, which I
mm,
don't think is fair to place on anyone. Like, some people are, just want to, raise their families and live a normal, happy life. And to choose that for someone by making them a superhuman, I just don't see us ever doing that. I think it's the imperfection of man is something that's kind of, and I use man as in mankind, um, is pretty,
how politically incorrect of you.
yeah. But yeah, anyway, mankind is like about self improvement, and then if you can, get yourself right, then contributing to society.
Mhm.
I feel pretty strongly about, which is why I don't know. I think a lot about how can I be a better person
Right.
first before I think of trying to change how others act
Right.
because
Right.
we talk about you can't control.
Yeah, no, and I think that's
It all
probably
starts at home. It all
yeah.
starts
Yeah,
with
and obviously that's a
you
big
make that
part.
decision. Like I make the decision like in a car now to not get angry. Just go with the flow. And just that little change has made driving so much more pleasant. And that was all just in my head. There was nothing like I didn't like do anything physically to myself. I just made a decision. I think a lot of life is making and affirming things about yourself and then acting out that story you want to tell yourself.
Mm-hmm. I think, going back to the idea of like, being like say born perfect, and it's like I mean, we could argue, say like, an athlete, say LeBron. Say LeBron James like basically has the ideal genetic code to be the greatest basketball player in the world. But at the same time, I mean, just reading up a little about his background, like he did, kind of maybe he wasn't like the, homeless, but he was definitely kind of came from poverty and was like I'm sure like very motivated by like, trying to kind of make it out, like, once he got into high school and started getting like all of these, crazy, news coverage, and he realized like, damn, like, I'm about to be making like millions in the NBA. Like, you know, it wasn't obviously just raw talent. And I mean, I think for anyone right now, I mean, even if it's you know, people we think of as, super, super smart, say, a chess wizard or something, it's like we don't think about like the number of hours, like that. I think like that, 10,000 hour rule, that Malcolm Gladwell about, it
Yeah,
takes 10,000 hours, whether that is true or not, but roughly,
some good,
10,000
but yeah, it takes time.
10,000 hours basically to fully kind of master a skill.
Mhm.
Um, and, in that book, it gave lots of examples of like, child prodigies, like Tiger Woods, like someone like he got his 10,000 hours in probably before he was 5. Like, he was raised on the golf course. He was literally a baby on the golf course. And it was like, he still had to have the genetic capacity to be able to, I mean, like think about like coordination and like hitting a golf ball. Like that involves very, very precise, fine motor movement. And like a lot of that is genetic. I mean, if he had some kind of like muscular dystrophy, you know, gene, then like obviously there would be no Tiger Woods. It's all a combo, I think, right? Like,
Yeah, no, it definitely. It's like also like there's also like it's like a 50-50. You know, you're dealt the hand you're dealt, but then it's what do you do with it? Like there are plenty of athletically gifted people who have chosen other avenues other than sport or using it. You know, it's like it's not like you have to. And a lot of these pro athletes fundamentally do enjoy it because it's hard. And like also like when we talk about LeBron, he also made a decision to not only be, he's made a good role model off the court. You know, he's a family man, he's, taking care of his kids, he does all these other things that, you know, charity, all these things that like he doesn't have to do. You know, he's an
mhm,
amazing basketball player. He could just, he could do whatever he wants off the court, but he doesn't,
mhm.
which I think is overlooked a lot with pro athletes where, there isn't much pressure for them to be a good person. They don't have to be.
No,
I mean,
no,
maybe
and
it's good for, their Nike deal or whatever, but for the most part, like if you can perform on the court, you don't necessarily like look at Michael Jordan. He wasn't like the nicest guy, but he
mhm,
won.
right.
And he was, savage on the basketball court.
That's actually another like kind of transitioning gears, but I think a very interesting topic within itself, and something we previously touched on to some degree, which is kind of, like thinking about like would Michael Jordan be Michael Jordan if he wasn't that like kind of harsh bastard that maybe he was. And I think like I mean I think of someone like Steve Jobs as someone I look up to immensely, and like I just think he was a genius, and like marvel at the things that he was able to accomplish in his lifetime. But it's been well documented that he was not good with like people. Like you, if you met him, you'd probably be like, that dude was an asshole.
Yeah.
Like, but at the same time, like, do you think the two and two go together? Like, of being, do you think you could be like a super nice person? Do you feel like that is
Yeah.
needed to be like kind of like harsh and kind of cold with other people in order to get to that highest degree of success, or is that like,
It's
is
hard.
that a correlation that is not like a, what is it like? It's not like causative or whatever.
Yeah, it's not like it's not the reason.
Yeah.
Again, it's these are questions you don't know. I do think there's no, I really do believe though there's no harm in being a good person. Like if I had the choice to be like best in a certain field, I was a jerk, or be a good person. Like I think that decision's pretty easy for me because I don't know if I could live with myself being not a good person but highly skilled. I think there's a balance to strike. You can't. And then some people just and sometimes that's what it takes for progress to fully just commit to what you're doing and not care about anything around you. But
Hmm.
I don't see myself as that kind of person.
Yeah. No, and before we go any further on that, I want to just like more go kind of big picture here. Like when you said that thing about like how, again, it's like we don't have a clear answer, right? As far like I asked you the question, it's like it's not something where you can be like, A is the correct answer, right?
Yeah,
Like but and that's sort of like the whole basis of this podcast in a sense, where it's like I'm not teaching anyone I'm not trying to teach anything. I'm not my, there's a lot of podcasts, a lot of media, how to, become a millionaire, stockbroker, well, crazy, what, all sorts of stuff. And it's like everyone wants like some method to follow, and like
Yeah.
that is not at all my purpose in doing this. I think like the way like what I want this to be is like a creative outlet, for like me and the guest, obviously, where we can really speak our mind, but also, you know, as something that's, uh, I think, what am I trying to say?
Just
Help
like
me out here. I was like,
also, this is what, so far to wrap up how I've, my experience is just really with
yeah,
talking with you. We like you do a good job of helping, flush out ideas and
yeah,
really really dig into maybe stuff you haven't thought about before. Like
right.
that's something
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
helpful to
I,
like talk about things that maybe you haven't talked about, or you're not really sure how to package, but put them in maybe also more like, I don't know, understandable way. Like I think like using it
right.
like using other mediums like music, for example, communicates a lot about our culture and our world, and
Yeah,
how people are viewing things, and maybe in a way that you couldn't communicate just through speech
right, right. I
or
think it's,
form
yeah,
cast versus a tweet. Like those are two, they can both hold interesting information, but they're going to be very different, even if you're talking about the same thing.
right,
Right.
right. Yeah, it's all the delivery of it. Yeah, yeah, I agree with a lot of the points you made. Like yeah, and just about, I mean, I feel like the podcast just being like, I feel like such a learning experience where it's like, you know, there's a difference, like you may get some learning from like being in a classroom and like having a professor go through a lecture, like a standard format of, practically all colleges, and just go through like a set lecture and just be talking the whole time. But then I think like, you know, so much of our like we're such a social species where it's like, in like a classroom, like, yeah, maybe you could interject something like when the professor's talking, but I feel like for the most part, people keep their mouths shut and just let them,
Yeah.
let them deliver the whole lecture, and there's not a lot of like social interaction. But it's like when we have these conversations, it's like you're telling me about things I haven't heard about. I'm probably, hopefully telling you about things you haven't heard about, and we're like kind of piggybacking off of each other's ideas. And I think like, there's something powerful in that that's like a different medium in terms of like just learning, and I honestly I think like a way of growing your intelligence even is just like hearing and like kind of embodying in a sense like other people's ideas, where like you like try to like take their perspective, and it's a lot of stuff that's like not necessarily like the book smarts that we hear so much about, but nonetheless is like super important.
Well, I don't have anything else to add to that, Toby. Anything else to talk about?
Damn, I'm good.
I,
No, yeah, I mean, no, that's all I wanted to say about that. I feel like there was an I mean, with going back to what we were talking about, like about being, like, sort of your opinion being like, like you can choose to be a nice person and accomplish amazing things, right? Like kind of, maybe going against that view of like, there is this, mean genius sort of thing. But I think also like unpacking that further, it's like you look at, people like, someone like Steve Jobs, and it's like he was, you know, he had certain traits that I think enabled, enabled Apple to grow to what it became. Like I feel like I mean, I guess there's a fine line between like being a nice person versus like being a pushover,
yeah,
and that it's because it's like if Steve Jobs is like from my understanding and everything I've watched and read, like he had a very set idea. He had it in his mind of like what he wanted all this stuff to look like. And whenever someone created something that was like a little bit different, it was like, no, do it better, do it this way, do it my way. He like wasn't super open to other people's suggestions,
Mhm.
but that sort of was like enabled him to get his vision across. And I think like a lot of us, like, say we have a vision of like what we want, employment, our employer, how we want our workplace to look like. But it's like we're afraid to like voice all of these kind of like our ideal, like I'm sure we all have these ideas of like, oh, it would be better if this and this and this changed, but it's like you're not going to say that at the next meeting because there's all of these like, social punishments that could, you could kind of get
Mm.
left out of the
Yeah.
pack.
Goes
But
back to your sheep versus wolves. Like
yeah,
there's a line my dad's like say, there are sheep and there are wolves. Which one are you?
as
And
you
it's
say,
not necessarily like I would definitely not say one is better than the other, although people want to say, oh, the wolf, but like there's something very satisfying to just doing your job well in the confines of your job and not being a disruptor and not being someone who messes up the vision. Because, you might not be the person with the right vision. So there's, again, we talk a lot about this fine balance between these two things.
right. Yeah, I think it's also something like, it's like what like we would think of, like what I would think of like someone else's life is like being shitty. Like they may be living the best life ever. Like,
Yeah,
like what is the expression? Like one man's garbage is another man's treasure or something like that.
yeah, yeah.
But whatever the exact wording of that is, it's like I was listening to an interview recently. I told you about this one, the Dan Bilzerian London Real interview. So for those of you who don't know, Dan Bilzerian's like kind of one of the golden children of like this age of Instagram, where you know, Instagram enabled him to basically blow up. He's a poker player, but he kind of gained this huge fan base and following and fame because he was like posting these like outlandish, crazy pictures of him partying and with tons of scantily clad girls and like just living like just such a crazy out there life. But then, in it, he was like talking about like, he's like, who am I to say that the person working a 9 to 5, you know, and they enjoy their work and they enjoy their coworkers and they go home to a loving wife and a couple kids, like who am I to, his, what he said was like, who am I to say that they aren't happier than me? Even though like we think we see on Instagram him living like that, and we're like, if I had that amount of money, if I had that amount of like, whatever it is, all those material possessions he has, like we think like we would be so happy, but would we?
Yeah. Who knows?
That's who knows. Again, it's an open question, right? Where like for, one person, it may, and other person it may not, but
And
I
you
think
also
you get
talk about setting yourself up to be happy. Like you can put yourself in, different. If you're someone who needs lots of social interactions, put yourself in situations where you're going to be social. If you're someone who's more reclusive and to yourself, there are things you can do to limit your social. Like it's all about finding. And again, this is just if I could just leave you with one thing, like it's just find what makes you happy and stick with it and figure out what makes you unhappy and try to work around that. Try to figure out ways to get around that to improve the aspects of your life that you like and minimize the aspects of your life that you don't like. And
hmm
find that balance, you'll
yeah,
that's fine. At least
yeah. I think
let's put it that way.
I think that's an awesome way to kind of wrap things up. And it's like, the whole thing of, you know, maybe the big problem with a lot of this media and AI and I guess all this stuff is like we're in a lot of ways putting our own happiness in other people's hands. And, I think a lot of what's going on now with, these revolutions in kind of yoga and meditation and all this stuff, it's like because people are realizing that happiness kind of lies within yourself. And, it's all about kind of like doing what, it takes to make yourself happy, as cliche as it sounds. Like,
Yeah,
it's kind of true, right?
yeah, definitely. And thanks for having me, Toby.
Yeah,
Maybe
man. Absolutely. I really enjoyed
again
talking.
sometime.
Yeah. All right. And I don't know if you have any um if I don't know if there's anything you want to like share as far as like ways people, if I don't know if you have a website, or if
No,
people
I
want to.
have no plugs. I
Yeah.
have no
Okay.
plugs.
Okay.
Just
You're
talk
not selling anything. You're not.
anything, not buying anything.
Okay.
Just enjoying life.
Okay. Good deal. Good deal. All right, Alex. So it was a pleasure.
Same. See
All
ya.
right. All right.